Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, Cadence independent media production. If you're new to the channel, what we do here is all about sound and tone, finding sounds, finding tone, busting myths, stuff like that. And there's also going to be some extra content from today's episode on our Patreon account, so head on over there if you want to see a little extra about what we did today and some kind of like behind the scenes stuff. Today we are talking about a very important topic actually, bass drum Reso ports. What are they? Why are they? Where are they? Do you need one? Should you not have one? All of that. The origin of ports in the bass drum has to do with getting a certain sound, both for live and recording, that is a little more controlled, has a little more attack, and it's just easier to manage in general. This, in my mind, starts sort of in the 60s and 70s. I'm sure there were instances of it before that. There's also, taking the full head all the way off the drum, which we've talked about. Ports are still super common. I would say they're probably still more common than full heads for traditional kind of pop music, all that stuff. And there are a lot of options involved in this. The placement of the port, the size of the port, the sort of head that you're using, to port in the front, all of that stuff can have a really dramatic effect. Thanks again to our presenting sponsor, ProMark by D'Addario, for helping us out. Today, we're gonna actually A/B a couple of ported heads, a couple of unported heads, and we're gonna cut some ports as well and give a little bit of a tutorial on like what that is and if you even wanna like get into that. Pros and cons of porting your front head. What we're looking at is, are we trapping the air inside the drum, or are we letting the air out of the front of the drum? The size of the port will affect this. Whether or not you have one's going to affect this more so. But even things like with this drum, it's got mounts in the top that are, maybe an inch across. So there's already air escaping out of there if you don't have both the toms on there. There's almost always ports on the drum in the form of a little grommet somewhere on the drum, just so that you don't have complete isolation of the air in there, because you might be more inclined to break a head if you're going to do that, because there's nowhere for the pressure to escape. When you have pressure escaping, it's going to change the feel of the drum, it's going to change the tone of the drum, and it's also going to change the tuning range of the drum, particularly where very low is what you're after, because when you're trapping the air inside of the drum, it's going to allow for the Reso head to be affected more and longer than if you have that port. Porting to me is about shortening the sound and about kind of controlling the sound, and then secondarily being able to like put mics inside and that kind of thing. Some classic examples of unported in backbeat music would be like John Bonham, for instance. That's a big drum, but also definitely not ported, definitely full heads, felt strips, that kind of thing. On the other hand, you can definitely see porting all the time, all the way back like with Steve Gadd. If you ever watch those videos from the 80s, he's got a big port in the center of the drum. And then, there's plenty of R&B clips from back in the day, Bill Withers and things, where the front head isn't even on the drum. That's the ultimate port. And all of these affect the sound and the feel in ways that the players were after to get the sound that they wanted. This is strictly about like what was working best and finding a solution and using that solution. So the heads du jour today are Evans EQ3 Resonant Black. This is unported. It's going to be ported later. And we also have with us the EMAD ported front head. This is a 4-inch port with a little bit of muffling around the edge, so it's not exactly the same deal as just a ported head. But we're just going to kind of put these all together and see how they sound. First, let's hear the EQ3 unported Resonant Black. First responses to this, it's a big sound. It's a little bit of a slow sound. It feels really good to hit. It's really fun. I love an empty bass drum. This is particularly effective because there's a little bit of muffling from the ring around the edge of that Reso head. And we have our old EMAD on this side as well. So there's a little bit of help in controlling the kind of extra crazy overtones. Burying the beater is also okay. I like off better because this is all about low end and about projecting that low end. So being able to powerfully hit it without burying it is my favorite thing to do with this. And it's usable in a ton of situations. It's great for recording, particularly studio situations where things are super controlled. If I was in like a 10,000 seat kind of place, it might not be my first choice. I might still go for a resonant sound, but getting a mic inside might be helpful, and just, to get the best sound for the audience. But overall, it's a big sound, it's a fat sound, and it's a long sound. So now we're going to see what happens when we sort of kind of squish it down a little bit. Next up is the EMAD resonant. It's a 4-inch port, and it has the sort of EMAD tech in here around this foam ring. Okay, right out of the gate, way more attack. There's still low end in here because we don't have a pillow in the drum or anything like that, and I am playing off the head, for the grooves. And this is already a different scenario for the microphone in particular, and that's got a lot to do with the point of this, is what is the mic going to get, what is it going to have to work with, and what is the engineer's life going to be like. Now, the previous sound, totally manageable. With nothing in the drum, there can be feedback issues, especially with low-tuned drums that don't have anything in them. They're going to have to do some EQ and things like that. With this, much more manageable. And also, for me, playing grooves, the sorts of things I'm inspired to do are a little more syncopated. They're a little faster in some cases. But most importantly, the response of the drum is much faster now. You don't have the sort of big bloom in the note afterward. It's less sort of in like canon territory and a little more in like a punchy kind of pocket thing. When I do a ported drum, I usually put EQ pads in it or maybe a blanket, depending, because usually if I'm porting it, it's because I want a shorter, punchier sound, and that helps to do that. Pre-muffled heads also help with that a whole lot. But at the end of the day, this is still giving us a lot of tone and a lot of low end, and there is some rumble in there for sure. There's less. But it is easier to play. It's easier to record. It's easier to mic. And I don't feel like we lost that much. Secondary benefit of the port, speaking of muffling, is that we can manipulate the muffling through the porthole instead of having to take the heads off, which is kind of a huge thing, because when you're adjusting muffling, whether it's live or even more so in the studio, little changes make a big difference, same as tuning. So having a hole, even a small one, this is only 4 inches, and I wouldn't go smaller than that if you're trying to put microphones in the drum. You don't want to get too small. But it means that you can reach in there and adjust things, move them around, and particularly figure out how they're touching the heads. Are they touching both heads, one, the other? You can lay it in there and then check out how it sounds and make adjustments accordingly. All right, now we're going to go back to the previous head, the EQ3 Resonant Black, which was unported earlier, and we're actually going to cut a port into it here. We're going to do the sound kind of comparison thing here, and then we'll talk about the process after. Six-inch port, a lot of air coming out of the drum, a lot less boom, a lot more punch, all that stuff. Still got some air in it, still some overtones because there's no pillows or blankets or anything in there. But, you can hear like it's pretty dramatic going just between those different things. And that is the exact same head from the beginning. That's the same exact one. So it's strictly just the port. Now, it's worth noting that we're not getting into matching pitches with the Reso heads of these different varieties, because the way to make them function is not to tune them to the same pitch. Like if there's no port, it's a completely different ballgame than if there's a small port or a big port. So we're tuning for preferred sound, basically. And, to each their own, do your thing. But understand that the fundamental difference is pretty dramatic. And if we had cut a 4-inch port in this instead of a 6, it would be a whole different thing again. So there's going to be extended play stuff, and there's going to be some different kind of close mic, far mic comparisons on the Patreon. Head over there and check that stuff out if you're so inclined. All right, DIY arts and crafts time. We have a head with no port in it, and we're going to put a port in it. There is a simple tool for doing this. It's called a circle cutter or a compass cutter. This is the one that we have here. It's a pretty inexpensive one. They get much fancier than this. A lot of metal compasses that are like for drafting and just general like drawing of circles have attachments for this kind of thing where you can put like an X-Acto knife blade on it or whatever. But the main thing with this is that it's got a pin on one side and it's got a blade on the other and a handle in the center. And the way it works is you just punch the needle through the head where you want the center of the circle to be, and then you spin this in a circle around the needle a few times, and the blade on the outer edge slowly cuts through. Now, it's important to note that you don't want to force this. You don't want to try to get all the way through the head on the first round. And you also don't want to push this around too much and start to widen the hole that you made, because it might end up with like an oblong circle or something like that. We need to make sure we're doing this on a surface where we can have a pin going through the head, and also where a blade might puncture through. So hardwood floors, not a great idea. Table that you like, not a great idea. I have normally done it on either a piece of cardboard or on a piece of scrap carpet, something like that, where I'm not afraid to push through. Sort of choose your own adventure as far as that goes, but know that both of these sharp things are going to go all the way through the head. So whatever you're doing it on, we are not responsible for destroyed furniture. In the case of today, we're actually just going to use the box that this bass drum head came in. We're just going to kind of slowly do it on top of there, and that'll give us the cardboard and also a little bit of air, a little wiggle room that way. Thinking about placement of this head, we have a factory ported head here, and the big thing to note about this is the relative distance to the edge of the head, and also the relative distance to this little muffling ring around the inside. We don't really want to be cutting into that, because that's going to complicate matters. So when you're doing this, I recommend doing it from the back. It's going to make everything easier beyond just, that we have this ring we have to deal with that would be raising it up if we tried to do it from the outside. Additionally, factory heads, I think most, if not all of the time, have some kind of reinforcement around the edge of this. We're going to be creating a point of stress. It's a spot that can get damaged with microphones and stands going through it all the time. So just bear that in mind when you're making it. If you make it too small, you might be running into a higher likelihood of damage as well. We're going to go with a 6-inch port today, which is 1 inch larger than the Evans standard, and 2 inches larger than the EMAD. This is going to allow more airflow, and it's also going to allow easier manipulation of muffling inside of the drum. It's going to maximize the effect of having an offset port like this. We're also going to have some additional content related to this on the Patreon in the upcoming week or so, involving different locations for the port, different sizes for the port, different things like that may or may not affect the sound dramatically. We're actually not sure yet. All right, so we're down on the floor. We've got our head out. We've sort of mushed the box flat for protection against the carpet here, so that we're not running the blade and the needle into that. And now we're going to go to it. So the first thing to do is figure out where we want to put the port. That's kind of the thing that's going to define the sound, and it's going to define the look even more so. So we need to know where the logo's at. And the logo, you can't see it because it's face down. So what I like to do with this is turn the head over, figure out where the logo is, press on the middle of it with my finger, and turn it back over. And you can see there's kind of a point on here where the pressure is pushing through. And I take a little piece of gaff tape, and we stick it right on the spot where I can see my finger poking through. So now we know exactly where the logo is, and we don't need to worry about cutting into it or having things be kind of off-center and weird looking. Now, this is a head with a little bit of a muffling ring around the edge. We don't want to catch that. So let's go ahead and pick a spot. We're going to set this to the largest size, which is 6 inches. And we're going to want to, before we poke it through the head, figure out a spot that's kind of offset and make sure that we're a good 1/2 inch away from the muffle ring. We're going to go ahead and do it on the same side as the stock head, which is on, I guess if you're facing the head, on the right side. So we're going to place this kind of in position, place the blade and the needle with the blade toward the edge so that we can know for sure that we're not touching the muffling ring. And then a little bit of pressure, go right through the head with the needle. Check and make sure when you start that you're turning this in the direction that the blade is meant to cut and not the other way around. It seems silly, but I've forgotten that before. Now, here's the big thing. We need to have a really clean line around this, and that means we're not going to try to power through the head on the first go around. That's too much pressure. It could get us offset. It could screw things up, and we need this to be as clean as possible. So when we start to cut, small amount of pressure and go around a bunch of times. Just make sure that you're not digging in and not trying to cut it the way you'd cut like a vegetable or something like that. We're going to go a few times around, and it's going to take a few to smoothly cut through. Periodically check just really gently to see if there's any spots you're not all the way through. You'll probably hear it when it hits through. It starts to sound different. Well, there we go. Now we got a nice 6-inch, pretty darn clean port in there. Just remember to go slow, go real slow, take your time. As long as you just really take your time and make sure that you stay centered, don't press too hard, stabilize the head. It's really not that difficult to do. It's a little spooky the first couple of times, you know, because it feels crazy to cut a head with a razor blade. But in the end, this is a way to take your favorite head, which may not come in a ported variety, and turn it into a ported one. The last thing I'll say about this is you're probably going to have some kind of little like stray bits, like, you know, hair thin bits around the edge. Don't get excited about yanking those off because it's possible that they could catch and tear or, you know, create a point of weakness in there. If you want to, you know, you can get there and just kind of like try to shave at them a little bit or something like that, but don't worry about them too much. It's not going to be razor perfect, even though we're cutting it with what is essentially a razor blade. This is just, you know, if you want to do your own, and don't worry if it's not like down to the micron perfect. It's more important that you don't get off and create any kind of like tears or slices that don't go along the circle. Also, for sure, the first time you do this, or if you're doing it somewhere that's not where you're used to doing it, if you can, try it out on a busted head first and see what it's going to feel like if you've bought a new tool or if you're just getting used to doing this type of thing yourself. You don't want to be kind of like beta testing your technique on the head that you want to use. You want to know what's going to happen. That's about it for this. So please like, comment, subscribe. Click that button next to the subscribe button so you get our notifications when we have new videos coming out. Please trip over to the Patreon if you get a chance and check out what we got going on over there. We're super excited about it. Lots of exclusive content, different things. And please let us know what you do with ports, if you are strictly one way or the other, if you have a size or a location you prefer. Thanks, of course, to ProMark by D'Addario, our presenting sponsor. And yeah, that's about it. See you out there.